I'm Ron Strickland. This webcast is one of a series in which I'm providing some brief lectures and commentaries on topics from the courses I teach in literary and cultural studies. This particular installment is on the Anglo-Saxon epic poem Beowulf. In other webcasts, I've provided a brief introductory historical background to Beowulf. I've discussed the aesthetic form and prosody of the poem, and I've discussed the plot and character development of Beowulf. Here, I want to talk about the ending of the poem, and I'll have some concluding remarks about the values expressed in the poem, and in particular, the interesting ways in which it seems to me that the poem's value system differs from the humanistic value system familiar to modern readers. You'll recall that Beowulf is able to grab a sword from Grendel's mother's hoard and to kill her just as she is about to stab him to death. Then Beowulf notices Grendel lying on the floor. He cuts off Grendel's head and bears it to Hrothgar as a trophy. Hrothgar honors Beowulf with praise, gratitude, and many noble gifts. Then Beowulf and his followers return to Higelac's court in Jatland. Eventually, Beowulf himself becomes king of Jatland. He rules in peace and harmony for 50 winters. Then, in his old age, Beowulf's kingdom is threatened by a dragon. One of Beowulf's subjects, a slave, has stumbled into the dragon's lair and has stolen a valuable cup, angering the dragon. Faced with this new threat, Beowulf wonders what he may have done to anger God, thus deserving this ill fortune. I'll read a few lines from this section. It happened long after, with Higelac dead, that war swords slew Eardred his son, when battle shieldings broke his shield wall and hurtled headlong at Hrethel's nephew. So Beowulf came to rule the broad realm. For 50 winters he fostered it well. Then the old king, keeper of kinfolk, heard of a dragon drawn from the darkness. He had long lain in his lofty fastness, the steep stone barrel guarding his gold. But a path pierced it, known to no person save him who found it, and followed it forward. The stranger seized but a single treasure. He bore it in hand from the heathen horde, a finely worked flagon he filched from the lair where the dragon dozed. Enraged at the robber, the sneaking thief who struck while he slept, the guardian woke, glowing with wrath, as his nearest neighbors were soon to discern. It was not by choice that the wretch raided the wondrous worm horde. The one who offended was stricken himself, sorely distressed, the son of a warrior, sold as a slave. Escaping his bondage, he braved the barrens and guiltily groped his way below ground. There the intruder trembled with terror, hearing the dragon who drowsed in the dark, an ancient evil, sleepily breathing. His fate was to find, as fear unmanned him, his fingers feeling a filigreed cup. Then terrible tidings were taken to Beowulf, how swiftly his own stronghold was stricken, that best of buildings bursting with flames, and his throne melting. The hero was heartsore. The wise man wondered what wrong he had wrought, at how he transgressed against old law, the Lord everlasting, ruler of all. His grief was great, and grim thoughts boiled in his breast, as never before. The fiery foe had flown to his coastlands, had sacked and seared his keep by the sea. For that the bold war-king required requital. He ordered a fender be fashioned of iron, better for breasting baleful blazes than the linden wood, warding his warriors. As I've mentioned before, the values of the poem may seem rather self-serving and simplistic from a humanistic modern perspective. The good characters are purely good, and the evil characters are purely evil. The heroes are not much given to self-reflection. But here's a moment where Beowulf considers whether he has done something himself to cause the troubles that have befallen his kingdom. Even though he's an old man, Beowulf is still very proud. So instead of facing the dragon with a large army at his back, he chooses only 11 of his warriors to go forward. When they see the fearsome fire-breathing dragon, all but one of Beowulf's warriors abandon the king. Only the young warrior Wiglaf remains by Beowulf's side. Beowulf fights the dragon and kills it with the assistance of Wiglaf, but Beowulf is also wounded in the fight, and he will die. Wiglaf condemns his cowardly comrades, and he sends a messenger back to Beowulf's court with the good news of the dragon's death and the sad news of Beowulf's death. The messenger also predicts dangers that lurk when enemies learn of Beowulf's death and of the cowardice of Beowulf's warriors. Wiglaf recounts Beowulf's last wishes, and the poem describes Beowulf's grand funeral. This is an image of an ornate golden buckle from a ship burial site at Sutton Hoo in England. And this is an image of a battle helmet found at Sutton Hoo. This reconstruction of the Sutton Hoo battle helmet shows what the helmet might have looked like originally. The Sutton Hoo ship burial site gives us insights into the social relations, culture, and value system of the Anglo-Saxons at the time of the events described in Beowulf. The artifacts of weaponry and treasure found buried with the Sutton Hoo warrior give us an idea of the kind of treasure buried with Beowulf. And this raises an interesting issue. In the poem, there's some tension between the representation of treasure according to pagan values, where treasure is valued as a marker of honor, and a Christian framework of values, where treasure is viewed in terms of temptation. Generally, treasure is seen in a pagan framework of values. Treasure represents honor, glory, power, worthiness. On the other hand, there are also hints of a representation of treasure in terms of a more Christian value system, where treasure represents evil, greed, sterility, and death. The ultimate futility of this valuing of treasure is perhaps suggested by the fact that these treasure hoards are guarded by monsters and dragons who have no use for all of this treasure and simply represent danger, evil, and greed. Perhaps the clearest example of the trouble that treasure can bring, even to those who do not really deserve it, is that of the slave who steals a cup from a sleeping dragon and thus brings danger to Beowulf's kingdom. This slave is a good man who has fallen on hardship through no fault of his own. He's described as a son of a warrior who steals the cup in desperation, not out of greed. This passage relating the misadventure of the slave and describing his character is notable in that it's the only passage in the poem that concerns a character who's not of the elite warrior class. Likewise, the poem pays little attention to female characters. Women are generally viewed as the possessions of men to be manipulated at their will. For example, Hygelac only daughter is given in marriage as a reward to a warrior called Eofor after he has killed an enemy, Ongunthiel. Modern poetry and fiction typically focuses on the growth and development of an individual character. Much attention may be given to the individual's inner consciousness and motivations. The challenges the individual character faces are not foregone conclusions, as they seem to be in Beowulf's case. Perhaps partly for this reason, there are many good modern filmic and fictional adaptations of Beowulf, and these adaptations typically change the story, adding some of these elements of modernity that are lacking in the original. With that, I'll conclude this webcast. But, as always, if you have questions or comments, send me an email.